Hello, everybody, and welcome to another ReproNim presentation. It is a joy and an honor to be here again after so many years since our last set of ReproNim presentations. I'd like to thank the organizers, Dr. Laird, Kennedy, and everyone involved for making this ABCD resource possible. I am Raul Gonzalez. I am a site co-PI with Dr. Angie Laird at the FIU site for the ABCD study and have been privileged to be a part of this study since its inception many years ago as we soon approach our 10th year anniversary. Today, I'm here to talk to you about the work group which I currently chair with Dr. Maribel Robledo Gonzalez, and that is the Friends, Family, and Community Working Group, previously titled Culture and Environment. The Friends, Family, and Community Working Group was reconceptualized and renamed for a variety of reasons, including to better capture the breadth of domains and the concentration of focus of the measures that are curated within this work group, which I will be spending time chatting with you about today. The learning objectives for this lecture. My goals are to describe the rationale and guiding principles for FFC assessment protocol test selection, to list and describe the updated domains and instruments that constitute the current FFC assessment protocol, and to discuss future directions of the FFC components within the ABCD study. As always, we start with our acknowledgement. Today, I will not be presenting any data per se, but I will be covering measures up to the 6-year follow-up, which is about where the current ABCD data release has data for. And I will also talk a little bit about some of the measures that have been added after the 6-year protocol to help inform investigators on the future assessment waves. This is the current roster, wonderful group of members within the FFC working group. I'll leave this up for a second so that all of them can be taken in. And of course, I have a note here on the bottom just to remind folks who may be looking at this and wondering, where is culture and environment? Well, here we are, reconceptualized as friends, family, and community. So what is some of the rationale guiding FFC working group content area and measure selection? It's important to put this in a bit of a historical context. I've put up here the original aims of the ABCD study and the aims as they were updated when the ABCD continuation was submitted in 2020. Looking at the original aims of ABCD, establishing how diverse patterns of substance use impact the structure and function of the developing brain, identifying the impact of substance use on health, psychosocial development, neurocognition, and so on, as well as understanding how substance use and addiction affect the onset, course, and severity of psychopathology and vice versa, identifying factors that influence trajectories of substance use and its consequences, and establishing how use of one substance contributes to use of other substances. Not surprising, given the origin of ABCD, a lot of the aims centered around substance use, and therefore a lot of the measure selection also focused on potential predictors, moderators, mediators of substance use behaviors. However, ABCD has expanded to include so much more about adolescent brain health and development, taking advantage of our deeply phenotyped participants and data. For the updated aims, we have to describe individual developmental pathways in terms of neural, cognitive, emotional, and academic functioning, and the influencing factors, developing national standards of healthy brain development, investigating the roles and interactions of genes in the environment on development, examining how physical activity, sleep, screen time, sports injuries, and other experiences influence brain development, determining and replicating factors that influence mental health from childhood to young adulthood, characterizing relationships between mental health and substance use, and specifying how use of substances such as cannabis, alcohol, tobacco, and others affect developmental outcomes, and how neurocognitive, emotional, and environmental factors influence the risk for adolescent substance use. The aims, of course, are still very squarely centered around substance use, but as I noted, so much more. And it really is in the area of the emotional, environmental factors, particularly around the proximal environment for the youth, that FFC measures hone in on. When we first set out to curate measures for FFC, additional guiding principles were for the measures to be developmentally appropriate. Baseline assessments needed to be feasible and valid for 9 to 10-year-olds. The youth are now much older, so things that were valid and appropriate at 9 to 10 may not be appropriate by the time that they're 16. We want to capture emerging youth behaviors and trends, including the transition that some of the youth now will be experiencing in emerging adulthood. Obviously, we want valid and reliable measures that are amenable to longitudinal assessment, preferably across adolescence. Whenever possible, data harmonization was a goal, using measures that have also been used in other large-scale studies. The content area of cultural measures, whenever they were applicable, we tried to make them be applicable to diverse populations and applicable to as many participants as possible. This was not always desirable, nor was it scientifically informed at times. And there were certain measures that were given to specific subset of individuals who had had specific experiences, which I'll describe in more detail in a bit. And then also measures needed to be brief. This is a very extensive protocol. We're assessing many, many different things. And culture and environment has consumed anywhere from 10 minutes of the total ABCD protocol to up to 30 minutes over the various measurement waves since the outset of the study. Now, this is a longitudinal study, so there are additional considerations in measure selection. We want consistency. We want simplicity over complexity. We want to consider typical developmental changes, emerging youth behaviors and trends, emerging scientific information, and we want to cover constructs that we might not have been able to fit in at prior time points, but yet capture a behavior thought to be relevant and important for ABCD goals. We always want to minimize the burden for our families, and we want to minimize the number of new additional platforms that our participants and our research assistants would have to shift from. This is a little bit of our framework from the Culture and Environment Working Group at baseline. The protocol consisted of things that could be grouped loosely into cultural factors, the proximal environment, and the family and social environment. Cultural factors included things like cultural practices, acculturation, and biculturalism, certain cultural values like self-reliance, how centered the family is in the goals of the family unit, religiosity, ethnic racial identity, experiences with unfair treatment and discrimination. The proximal environment, particularly given the age, the school environment, so very important, as well as neighborhood and community environment, and family and social environment, positive relationships between parent and child, parental awareness of child's activities, and things like family conflict, cohesion, and activities, that home environment, and peer influence. I refer you to 2 papers that have been published by the FFC working group, and hopefully there will soon be a series of papers in an upcoming special issue of Developmental Cognitive Neuroscience that will review findings from the corpus of ABCD studies organized by various working groups, which we hope will be another valuable tool and resource moving forward. Now, this is how we started. This is certainly not how we've ended, nor where we're at. As we start thinking about the youth emerging into adulthood, and right now we are at a point in the ABCD study where we are approaching our last year of measurement for this funding cycle and are looking ahead toward the possibility of an adult ABCD renewal, where we will continue following participants into adulthood should there be funding and should the proposal be funded. In thinking about the future, we have reconceptualized somewhat, at least within the FFC working group, the way in which we've been conceptualizing and organizing our measures. We've applied the Bronfenbrenner bioecological model to the domains and measures that we are including in FFC. And here on the left, what you can see is the Bronfenbrenner framework, where we divided the measures up into those that focus on the person, those that focus on the microsystem, and those that focus on the exosystem and macro system. Now, these do not map on 100% neatly onto the Bronfenbrenner model, but we still think that these general groupings of measures within this particular framework is helpful for getting a picture of how deep we're going into each of these important domains and areas. So for person, we can subdivide the measures that we administer into those that are capturing information on values and identity, and those that are capturing information on social and emotional functioning. And as we move forward in this presentation, I will be covering each of these measures very briefly to give you a little bit of a taste of what we're measuring and capturing, as well as providing you with resources where you can get more detailed information. The microsystem is incredibly important for understanding the youth, and during the ages which we've been following, some of the most important are going to be the family, the school, peers, and then some experiences that could be measured across a variety of settings. And finally, for the exosystem, macrosystem, we cover things like community cohesion and neighborhood safety, information about educational and vocational status, acculturation, socioeconomic information as well. We'll talk a little bit more about each of these. First, let's start with the person-focused measures. And here we have those that we have classified as capturing aspects of values and identity. Here we can see the youth measures on the top and the caregiver measures on the bottom, and the various measurement waves from baseline to the 6-year follow-up, which is as far as the current data release goes. Red means the measure was not administered. Solid green means that the measure was administered, and the lighter green with an asterisk suggests that there was a not insignificant change made to the measure at that particular time point. And I will cover each of these. But looking at this, one of the messages that I want to convey is that, as you can see, early on, we were not collecting a lot of data on values and identity from the youth. And that shifted as youth started entering early to mid-adolescence, where values and identity are forming and developing more within the youth. One exception was the Fenix measure of acculturation, which is an indirect proxy of acculturation via language use. We'll talk about each of those a little bit more. Situation was a little different for the caregiver, which you collected much more information from them about their values and identity to help inform the values and identity in which the child is developing and growing up. And as you can see, we've collected these measures throughout baseline to 6 years, but collecting less from the caregiver as the study has progressed. I'll now cover each of these in a little bit more detail. So the MIMAR, the multi-ethnic identity measure, is a 6-item short form assessing ethnic identity with 2 subscales that provide a summary score for commitment and exploration. At the 5-year, there was a change where mixed race, which was an option, was changed to multiracial or multi-ethnic, and the ability was added for the individual to pick multiple races or ethnicities rather than being limited to one. At the 6-year follow-up for the youth only ethnicity was queried at that time point without the initial MIMAR items. And then we proceeded to continue to collect the MIMAR items at future measurement waves, which I'll discuss a little bit later. The Native American Acculturation Scale asks 3 questions on participation in cultural traditions, and it's given only to those who identify as American Indian or Alaska Native, of which we have uh, many individuals given the locations of some of our sites. The Mexican American Values Scale revised, or the Values Scale, is a subset of items that generate subscales on family values of familism, which include family support, obligation to family, and how much one refers to the family for important decisions and decision making. So how centered is the family in terms of an individual's values? We've also queried the religiosity subscale and also on independence and self-reliance. At the 6-year follow-up, item response theory was used, and it was determined that a single familism summary score could be derived with 11 items, and we switched to that. As the protocol has moved through the years and additional domains have been added or measures added, given the finite amount of time that we have available and the desire to minimize burden for participants, we have had to either skip measures on certain years to allow room for others, or find ways to shorten measures while still obtaining the information that is of most relevance to us, as we did with the value scale. The Vancouver Index of Acculturation short form are 10 pairs of items assessing acculturation bi-dimensionally. At the 5-year, instructions were revised, and it was only administered to families endorsing an immigration experience to the US in a recent generation. And the measure was discontinued at the 5-year. And a new measure was brought in, which I will talk about a little bit later, focusing on acculturation gap rather than the Vancouver Index of Acculturation to obtain that. I've already mentioned the acculturation measure from FINEX. So this is a subset of questions that queries self-report of proficiency in English and in another language, if another language is spoken, as well as language use with friends and family as an indirect proxy for acculturation. At the 2-year, self-reported proficiency was asked of both languages, not just English, when more than one language was reported. Moving on to the social emotional measures. Understandably, mental health does a phenomenal and very thorough job of tracking youth mental health. There are some additional measures of social emotional health and well-being that did not make it into the mental health protocol, and we have curated some of these measures within FFC. A measure that we've collected since the outset of the study from youth and caregivers is a measure on pro-social behaviors. So this is from the Strength and Difficulties questionnaire. There's a shortened version retaining only 3 items with the highest factor loadings. And this assesses the tendency to engage in behaviors to help others. The youth reports on themselves and the caregivers report on the youth. The Will's problem-solving scale was administered twice during the ABCD study. This is a subset of items from the Will's problem-solving scale that had the highest correlations with substance use behaviors in earlier longitudinal study that assessed youth's approach to problem solving. And then finally, here we have resistance to peer influence, which was administered to the youth at the 4, 5, and 6-year follow-up. This is a 10-item survey adapted for electronic data capture from its original format with consultation with Dr. Steinberg. Participants choose which describes them more from 2 options, reflecting how much they go along with their peers or resist their influence. For the prosocial behavior subscale, you can see that we did not administer that to the caregivers at the 5-year follow-up. No major reason for that other than we needed time to be able to capture data from other measures. The prosocial behavior subscale has been very stable over the years, but we do find that families do enjoy completing it. It's brief and it provides at least some reporting of positive prosocial behaviors so that the protocol is not just slanted toward pathology. From this slide, you can see that a lot of time and resources has been spent on trying to capture information on a very important aspect of the microsystem, and that's the family environment. When looking at the youth, we've asked the youth to report on aspects of the family environment throughout, mainly on their parents, and a little bit about experiences they may have had at different points in time in their upbringing, and to their knowledge, how well they're being monitored by their parents. And we'll cover each of these in detail on the next slide. The caregivers have been completing the family conflict subscale of the FES, as have the youth, which allows for comparisons throughout the study. We started collecting other aspects of the FES, family cohesion, both from youth and caregivers, but mainly from the caregivers, and additional subscales from the FES as well. While we asked the youth about parental monitoring, we asked the parents about their knowledge about the youth. And at the 6-year follow-up, we started collecting information from the parents about any rules around driving. And there was a one-time capture of information on cognitively stimulating environment during the youth's early years, just like the multidimensional neglectful behavior scale that was asked of youth, asked about early experiences with neglect. So here's a little bit of information about each of these scales. The acceptance subscale from the CRPBI is a shortened version retaining the 5 highest loading items on the acceptance scale, and that examines perceptions of caregiver warmth, acceptance, and responsiveness, answered by youth on the primary and, if identified, secondary caregivers. The family environment scales, a self-report of family environment is perceived by the youth and by the caregiver, covering various domains, including family conflict, cohesion, intellectual, cultural orientation of the family, active recreational orientation, and expressiveness. The last 3 have only been asked of the caregivers. The first 2, family conflict and family cohesion, have been asked of both. The multidimensional neglectful behavior scale consists of 8 items that were adapted from earlier studies assessing neglectful parenting behaviors, and it's reported by youth via 2 summary scores covering about parental supervision and educational support. Parental monitoring is asked of the youth. These are 5 items answered by the youth and assessing several aspects of caregiver youth monitoring, including the caregiver's knowledge of youth's whereabouts and communication with the youth. Items were adapted from those used in many prior studies. We began asking a simple question about pet ownership, a single item asking youth about pets in the home. We began asking parents about parental knowledge. This is a modified version of the Staten-Kerr parental monitoring questionnaire and asked of caregivers. And they're focusing on their knowledge of their youth's whereabouts, who their companions are, and the activities that they're engaged in. Driving rules, which were added and asked of the caregivers, were adapted from previous questionnaires, with 6 items asking caregivers about youth's licensure or permit to drive, consequences for risky driving behaviors experienced by the youth, and parental rules on driving. And as I mentioned, the home short form cognitive stimulation items was a one-time assessment with 10 items asking caregivers about youth's very early home and life environment that foster or limit opportunities for intellectual growth. 6 items are from the Cognitive Stimulation Deprivation Index of the Home Inventory, and the final 4 items come from the Positive Parenting Practices of the National Survey of Children's Health. Sticking with the microsystem and moving to school, peers, and across settings, as you can see here, when it comes to schools and peers, it's the youth whom we are predominantly asking questions of. The only exception is about attendance and grades, of which we've asked both the youth and the parents over the course of the study. The youth measures include the peer behavior profile, a short version with 6 items that assess involvement with pro-social and rule-breaking peers, yielding 2 subscales. Peer network health protective. Here, the youth identify and rate 3 of their closest friends on their encouragement of pro-social behaviors. School risk and protective factors was derived from the FENEX School Risk and Protective Factors Protocol and includes items forming 3 subscales that assess perception of school experiences. These are school environment, school engagement, and school disengagement. Starting at the 5-year follow-up, only involvement and disengagement items were asked. At the 6-year follow-up, only school environment and disengagement questions were asked. And we alternate between these moving forward. And of course, school risk and protective factors as youth start moving away from secondary education will be phased out. School attendance and grades. Youth are queried on their current grades and the number of unexcused absences during the last 4 weeks to help accuracy with recall. Caregivers provide information on grades, also excused and unexcused absences during the past 4 weeks and 12 months, and whether the youth has an individualized educational program and why. Experiences with unfair treatment and perceived discrimination. These items were derived and adapted from the 2006 Boston Youth Survey and the measure of perceived discrimination by Finney et al. Asked participants about experiencing unfair treatment for various reasons across different settings. And this questionnaire has been expanded over time. It includes feelings of unfair treatment or discrimination from things ranging to race and ethnicity, to body type, to religion, so on and so forth. Moving to the exosystem and macrosystem within FFC. So a questionnaire that we started rolling out to the youth, starting at the 5-year follow-up, is an activity-based questionnaire. This is adapted from the ecological interview from prior study. And this questionnaire identifies a youth's most frequently visited places outside of their home and their school. And we collect self-report information on safety, stress, and walking distance to the location. Neighborhood safety and crime has been asked of both the caregiver and youth. The youth answer one question on perceived safety in their neighborhood, whereas the caregivers answer 3 questions on neighborhood safety. At the 4-year, youth also began reporting on number of arrests that they've experienced, if any. Community cohesion was assessed of the caregivers at 3 time points. These were 10 items from the FENX Neighborhood Collective Efficacy Survey, and it assesses social cohesion and neighbors working together toward common goals, yielding 2 subscales, one for community cohesion and one for community control, as well as an overall summary score called collective efficacy. That summarizes the protocol for FFC up to the 6-year follow-up, which is up to where the current data release gets us. I would anticipate that individuals tuning in to these ReproNim presentations are also curious about what's ahead, since we are currently collecting data on the 8-year follow-up and soon we begin collecting data on the 9-year follow-up. We can give you a little bit of a preview as to some of the data that will be coming out in recent years. So looking at the youth measures, here in this slide, we have them divided into existing measures, which are measures that I have already covered during this presentation. And on the right, we have new measures that have been introduced starting at the 7-year follow-up. When we look at the existing measures, you can see that we continue to collect information on activity space, aspects of the family environment, identity, parental monitoring, peer involvement, school and grades. But as we get to the 9-year follow-up, we start collecting less and less information about the school, and we start collecting some new information. So rather than collecting information on acculturation from both the parent and the youth, we are honing in on the acculturation gap for individuals from families that have had an immigrant experience in recent generations to try to capture differences and the gap between caregivers and youth within the household. Demographics had previously been asked in detail of the caregivers, but now we're shifting to asking demographic information of the youth as well. And of course, this includes all sorts of things like household makeup and income, job involvement, expectations, aspirations, and just typical demographic information as well. We have begun asking the youth some information about their driving behaviors, particularly risky driving behaviors at the 8 and at the 9-year follow-up. We're collecting much more detailed information on education and vocational status to try to capture the very broad range of experiences from military to staying at home to technical schools, college, the many, many experiences that our youth may go on to experience as adults. We've also added two questionnaires from the NIH Toolbox battery at the 9-year follow-up, the self-report questionnaire on emotional support within their lives, and another questionnaire on their self-rated life satisfaction. At the 7-year follow-up, we also began collecting data on self-reported loneliness using the UCLA loneliness scale. At the 9-year follow-up, we've introduced the MacArthur SES ladder, which is a visual representation of a ladder on which the youth can endorse where they view themselves in our broader social context from perspective of socioeconomic status or social status in general. And then finally, we have shifted to asking the Native American acculturation questions about participating in Native American traditions for Native American youth, starting at the 7-year follow-up, rather than asking these questions from the caregivers. So as you can see, measures have shifted based on the youth's age and their developmental stage. Several measures have been discontinued by the time we get to the 9-year follow-up, and several new measures have been introduced at the 7-year follow-up, many of which we would hope will continue into a potential future for ABCD. For the caregiver, there have not been any major new measures added. A lot of the measures that we've collected in the past, we've continued to collect. But if there is one trend that is discernible, is that we are relying less on caregivers for information and relying more on the youth. Okay, as I'm wrapping up here, I'd like to point you to a very useful resource that you may or may not already know about. The URL is up at the top. This is the ABCD Wiki. Here you can make your way to the menu on the left and find the various ABCD working groups, and that will lead you to tables that will list each and every single one of the measures. Clicking on one of the icons with the little kind of neuron electrode circuit chips where you can see the table names will lead you to DEEP, an incredible resource that has been developed by the DAIRC within ABCD that allows you to navigate all of the data, see the individual items. It is a fantastic data dictionary. Even allows you to very quickly see some descriptive statistics on each of these. If you have not spent time here, you absolutely should. It will make your use of ABCD data a little more enjoyable, I'm sure. So looking forward to ABCD or adult ABCD, what role is there for friends, family, and community? Well, we will continue to focus on contextual factors, demographics, vocational and educational status, the social environment, and social emotional well-being across the person, their microsystem, and their macro exosystem. Many domains and constructs that were introduced in recent measurement waves will likely continue to be assessed in a developmentally appropriate manner moving forward. We're planning on the possibility of enhanced measurement of activity spaces to collect not just where they're going, but actual latitude and longitude of these places where they're spending most of their time, which could open the door for opportunities with linked external data in the future. But in addition to that, we could also query self-report information about these spaces where they're spending most of their time outside of home. One of the challenges that we continue to meet is that of capturing the diverse and very heterogeneous experiences that we are going to see across our participants. Some closing remarks. Thank you for your time and interest in ABCD and the ABCD data. A thank you to all of our collaborators, all of our participants, all of our families, our NIH partners, our taxpayers who've made this study possible. The ABCD Study FFC work group has curated numerous contextual measures of youth and caregivers across person, microsystems, and aspects of the exo and macro system. These measures are chosen to inform context for important developmental changes that occur during adolescence and into emerging adulthood. as well as additional factors that may moderate or mediate associations with other core elements of ABCD. The measures that have been shown important for substance use trajectories of mental health are often prioritized, as well as those that have been used in other large-scale studies. This is a tidbit of information as we prepare our review article for the DCN ABCD 10-year anniversary. Hopefully, will get accepted in the issue. As of August 2025, there have been over 300 peer-reviewed publications that have included measures from the FFC working group in their analyses and or their results, clearly suggesting the value of their use within the study. FFC and many of the domains assessed are anticipated to be a continued part of the ABCD assessment protocol. And I'll wrap up with a picture that was taken almost 9 years ago of the ABCD consortium at the time. It has grown so much since then. It certainly does not capture everybody, but you can appreciate how much each and every single one of us has aged in the carrying out of this historic study. Again, thank you for your interest. The value of the ABCD study is magnified by the work that you do and your use of the data. If there's anything that I may personally be of help with, you have my email address from this presentation. Happy to answer any questions about FFC measures or anything else that I may be well positioned to address. Thank you so much for your time.